The sky was dark, darker than it had ever been, as if even the stars had turned away from the horror descending upon the planet. No one could have predicted how it would begin. No warnings, no messages, just an abrupt arrival of huge, silent ships that hovered above cities, their shapes a dreadful shape against the starlit sky. People looked up in confusion and disbelief, standing in streets and fields, their everyday lives shattered in a heartbeat. This was no drill, no wild tale of conspiracies. This was real. Humanity's final hour had begun. Commander Erik Voss stood amidst his team in a remote control room, a secret military base deep underground. The command center buzzed with frantic voices and flashing screens as operators scrambled to piece together what little they knew about the alien ships, their sudden arrival throwing everyone into chaos. "Commander, we're receiving reports from across the globe. They're everywhere. There's no pattern, no clear target. They're just there." The voice of his second-in-command trembled, but Erik's face remained impassive. Years of service had trained him to keep his composure, but the sight of the monitors, hovering ships blocking out entire cities, sent a chill through his battle-hardened heart. "Have they made any demands? Any attempt at communication?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "None, sir. They're just waiting." Erik gritted his teeth, trying to grasp their intentions. The silence was worse than an attack. It was as if they were studying the planet, watching and waiting for something. For hours, they held their breath, waiting for the aliens to make the first move. But when it came, it was nothing like they had imagined. The first attack was as sudden as it was devastating. Without warning, beams of light erupted from the underside of the ships, striking key areas with precision. Entire buildings vaporized in seconds, crumbling into ash as the beams sliced through them. Cities that had taken centuries to build were reduced to rubble within minutes. Erik's heart sank as he saw the reports coming in, each one a fresh wound as the scope of the destruction became clear. "Send out the evacuation orders. Get everyone into the bunkers. And for heaven's sake, get our defensive systems online," he commanded, his voice carrying a steel resolve. The next few hours were a blur. Sirens wailed across the cities, panic spreading like wildfire as people fled to designated shelters. But Erik knew that shelters could only buy them time. The aliens weren't here for diplomacy or negotiation. They had come to annihilate. As the night wore on, Erik's forces scrambled to mount a defense, deploying whatever weaponry they had at their disposal. The alien technology, however, was unlike anything they had seen. Their shields absorbed every attack, their movements too fast for radar systems to track. Still, the humans pressed on, unwilling to let their planet fall without a fight. Suddenly, the command center's monitors flickered, showing a live feed from a frontline city under siege. It was a horrifying sight. Streets engulfed in flames, alien machines stalking the ruins with a predatory grace. They moved like shadows, almost invisible until they were right upon their targets. Erik clenched his fists as he watched, helplessly, as soldiers tried to hold the line, their efforts met with brutal retaliation. This wasn't a war, it was a massacre. "We need reinforcements," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The few units they had managed to mobilize were already being overrun, and Erik knew that he was sending men to their deaths. But there was no choice. If they didn't act now, there wouldn't be a world left to save. In the distance, he heard the ominous hum of alien ships drawing closer, their lights casting eerie shadows across the ruined landscape. The remaining soldiers braced themselves, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces etched with a grim determination. They knew that this might be their last stand, but there was no hesitation in their eyes. They would fight, even if it meant facing an enemy beyond their comprehension. Erik took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the battlefield unfolding before him. He could feel the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him, but he wouldn't falter. Not now. Not when the fate of his planet hung in the balance. "We hold this line," he said, his voice steady. "No matter what happens, we hold this line." The ruins smoldered as Erik scanned the nightmarish landscape before him. The darkened sky was now marred by the metallic glow of alien ships. The world as he knew it was being reshaped. No longer cities and borders, but war zones where survival hung by the thinnest thread. His command center buzzed with voices carrying news of more attacks, casualties mounting by the second. Yet, amid the destruction, they had managed to buy precious time. A brief silence settled over the battlefield, a lull before the storm resumed. "Commander Voss, satellite images show their forces regrouping," came the voice of Captain Lena Reeves, a formidable tactician Erik had known for years. She leaned over one of the monitors, her eyes narrowed. "It's like they're recalculating as if the entire invasion was just a test." Erik's jaw clenched. This wasn't a battle of numbers or firepower. The aliens had a sinister intelligence behind their attack. They were adapting. "Patch me through to all frontline bases," he ordered, his tone hardening as he prepared to address his troops. Moments later, his voice echoed across the network, reaching every corner of their fragile defenses. "All units, this is Commander Voss. I know you're exhausted. I know what we're facing feels unstoppable. But I promise you, we're not done yet. We're holding our ground. The world is counting on us." With his orders given, Erik turned his focus back to his command team. A map of their remaining defenses flickered on the monitor, highlighting strongholds that had somehow withstood the initial attacks. He knew they couldn't win this war with brute force alone. They needed strategy, unity, and above all, hope. "Captain Reeves, I want reports from every stronghold that's still standing. We need to know where to fortify and where to strike back," he said, his mind racing through options. "We still have pockets of resistance across several major regions, Commander," Reeves responded. "But their power sources and communication lines have been disrupted. They're scattered, fighting blind." Erik's gaze fell upon the tactical map, his finger tracing the lines of communication that had been severed. Reconnecting those forces would be nearly impossible. The aliens' technology was far beyond anything humans could match. But if they could rally their defenses, perhaps they could force the invaders into a stalemate, buying time to regroup. "We'll establish a new chain of command and organize teams for quick intel exchange. We'll call them fire teams," Erik decided, the name fitting the desperate fight they were in. "Small groups, self-sufficient, with the best tech we can give them. They'll move across the city ruins, maintaining communications, relaying intel back here, and striking wherever they can." Lena nodded, quickly tapping commands into her console. "Understood, sir. I'll mobilize them immediately." A soldier burst into the room, panting and covered in ash, his face pale. "Commander, we've got a problem. One of the strongholds, the Alpha base, it's under siege. Heavy casualties were reported. They're holding out, but barely." Erik didn't hesitate. "Get me in contact with Alpha's commander. Now." The screen blinked, flickered, and finally the face of Commander Ellis appeared, her face bloodied and lit by the flames behind her. Her voice crackled with static as she shouted orders over her shoulder. "Commander Voss, we're barely holding on here. These things, they've breached our outer defenses. We're falling back to the inner perimeter, but I don't know how long we can hold." Erik's mind raced, calculating their options. "Listen, Ellis. Reinforcements are on the way, but you have to hold your ground. You're a key point between their forces and our main command center." Commander Ellis nodded, her determination evident despite the desperation in her eyes. "We'll do what we can, sir. Just make it worth something." The screen cut out, leaving Erik with the grim realization that the Alpha base might not survive the night. Around him, his command team worked tirelessly, setting up defenses and coordinating the new fire teams. Erik's fire team, a small elite unit assembled for high-risk missions, prepared for deployment. He would lead them himself, joining the battle on the front lines. Moments later, Erik's team, equipped with advanced weaponry and protective suits, moved through the charred remains of what had once been a vibrant city. The destruction was staggering. Buildings were leveled, and the few people they encountered were battered survivors, their faces etched with fear. Erik tried to push the sight out of his mind, but he knew it would stay with him forever. As they neared Alpha Base, the air filled with a strange electric hum, a sound Erik had come to dread. His team froze, ducking into cover as alien drones zipped overhead, their sleek, insect-like forms scanning the area. The drone's sensors glowed with an eerie light, sweeping over the landscape. For a moment, Erik thought they'd be detected, but the drones passed, leaving them untouched. He exhaled slowly, signaling his team to move. Finally, they reached Alpha's outer perimeter. The scene was worse than he'd imagined. Alien forces swarmed the base, their sleek, otherworldly forms casting long shadows in the firelight. Commander Ellis and her troops fought fiercely, but they were heavily outnumbered. Erik didn't waste time. "On my mark," he whispered to his team. They aimed, waiting for the perfect moment. "Now!" The team opened fire, their shots precise and relentless, tearing through the aliens' ranks. The sudden assault caught the invaders off guard, giving Alpha's defenders a much-needed respite. Erik led his team forward, cutting a path through the chaos until he reached Commander Ellis, who gave him a weary but grateful nod. "Good to see you, Commander," she said, reloading her weapon with shaky hands. "Likewise," Erik replied. "We're not done yet." Together they fought side by side, rallying the remaining soldiers in a desperate push against the alien forces. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like they had a chance. Erik could see the aliens faltering, their lines thinning. But then a sound like thunder rumbled through the battlefield. The ground shook, and Erik looked up to see a massive alien war machine descending from one of the hovering ships. It was unlike anything they had faced, a towering construct of metal and energy, armed with weapons that glowed ominously. "Fall back!" Erik shouted, pulling Ellis with him as the monstrous machine unleashed a devastating blast. The explosion tore through their ranks, scattering soldiers and leaving a smoking crater where they had once stood. The survivors scrambled to regroup, but it was clear they were outmatched. The alien machine moved with relentless precision, its weaponry cutting through any resistance. Erik gritted his teeth, his mind racing. This was beyond anything they had prepared for. But he couldn't let despair take over. Not now. He activated his comm, reaching out to all units. "This is Commander Voss. All fire teams converge on my position. We need every available unit. We're taking this thing down." One by one, fire teams responded, rallying to Erik's location. They formed a perimeter, coordinating their firepower in a relentless assault against the alien machine. The battle raged on, each explosion shaking the ground, each blast a reminder of the stakes. For every soldier that fell, 2 more stepped up, driven by a fierce determination to defend their world. As the hours wore on, the machine began to falter. Erik's team pressed forward, exploiting every weakness, striking with a unity that even the aliens hadn't anticipated. And finally, with a deafening roar, the machine collapsed, its twisted metal carcass smoking in the dawn light. The battlefield fell silent, the alien forces retreating for the first time. Erik lowered his weapon, exhaustion washing over him. They had won this battle, but he knew the war was far from over. He looked at his team, at the weary soldiers who had fought so valiantly. This was only the beginning. The aliens would return, stronger and more determined. But for now they had proven one thing. Humanity would not go quietly. After their harrowing escape from the ambush, Erik's team was weary and wounded, but determined. The battles they had fought had been fierce, but they sensed this was only the beginning. Back at their makeshift base, Erik called for an emergency meeting with the remaining commanders and strategists. Maps, documents, and reports littered the conference table as everyone gathered, exchanging grim glances. It was clear that the aliens were adapting rapidly. Their strikes were becoming more coordinated, as if they were analyzing humanity's every move and devising increasingly devastating counterattacks. "We can't keep doing this," Lena said, her voice heavy. "They're learning faster than we can adapt. They're targeting our defenses with frightening accuracy." Erik nodded, his mind racing. "We need a plan that goes beyond just defense. Something they won't expect. A strike that could disrupt their entire network." As the team strategized, intelligence arrived about a mysterious facility the aliens had constructed in the heart of a ruined city. Reconnaissance images showed that it was unlike any of their known structures, taller, more fortified, and bristling with unknown machinery. Erik immediately knew this was the target they needed. He was certain it was a command center or a relay hub, and if they could take it down, they might cripple the aliens' ability to coordinate their attacks. After hours of planning, Erik's elite unit set out under the cover of night. The journey was perilous. Alien drones swept the skies, and ground patrols scoured the landscape, forcing the team to move silently and with the utmost caution. The closer they got to the facility, the stronger the alien presence became. It was clear this structure was critical to their operations. Finally, after days of infiltration, they reached the edge of the alien facility. It towered over them, a monstrous amalgamation of alien technology, pulsating with a strange, eerie energy. Erik's team knew that taking it down would be nearly impossible, but they also knew it was their only chance. With a silent nod, Erik signaled the assault. The team moved in, using every tactic they had learned throughout the war. They bypassed security drones, disabled alien traps, and cut through patrols with ruthless efficiency. As they moved deeper into the facility, they encountered resistance unlike anything they'd seen. Alien soldiers with advanced armor and weapons fought fiercely to defend their command center. Erik's team sustained injuries, and several members fell, but they pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that this mission could turn the tide of the war. Finally, they reached the heart of the facility, a massive control room filled with alien consoles and holographic displays. In the center was a towering structure emitting waves of energy, clearly some kind of communications relay. Erik realized that this relay was likely coordinating the alien forces worldwide. If they could destroy it, the alien army would be thrown into disarray. As they set explosives around the relay, an alarm blared. Alien reinforcements flooded into the room, and a brutal firefight erupted. Erik's team fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, his team members fell, covering each other as they tried to complete the mission. Erik was wounded, barely able to stand, but he crawled to the final charge and set the timer. With the relay seconds from destruction, Erik gave one final look at his remaining comrades, nodding to them in gratitude. They had given everything for this moment. As he activated the last charge, a deafening explosion ripped through the facility, engulfing everything in flames. The relay's destruction sent a shockwave across the battlefield. Alien forces around the globe faltered, their coordination broken. In the command center, Lena and the remaining leaders watched in astonishment as alien formations collapsed. Ships retreated, drones fell from the sky, and ground troops scattered, their movements erratic. In the aftermath of the explosion, human forces rallied, launching a final offensive against the disoriented aliens. Cities that had been under siege for months were liberated as the alien forces struggled to regroup. For the first time, humanity had the upper hand. But Erik's sacrifice had not been in vain. The destruction of the alien command relay had bought humanity the time and space they needed to regroup and launch a coordinated counterattack. Across the world, human forces rallied, driving the alien invaders back inch by inch. What had once seemed like an impossible struggle became a battle for survival. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Months passed, and the final remnants of the alien invasion force were pushed off Earth. Humanity had paid a terrible price, but they had emerged victorious. Erik's name became a legend, a symbol of resilience and sacrifice, and humanity began the long process of rebuilding. The war had changed them, but they were stronger for it. Earth was theirs, and they would defend it against any threat that dared to come again.